This is Fenland Falls near Peterborough. And a few years ago, an aerial photographer saw some interesting crop marks here and took some photos. This is one of them, and these are the marks. They're huge, about 200 metres across from here to here. Archaeologists had a look at the photos and got very excited. They think that they're evidence of a 6,000-year-old structure, which they call a Neolithic causewayed enclosure. But agreeing on a name and agreeing they're very important is the easy part. Agreeing what they're for is very different. Is this evidence of a massive farm or some kind of settlement or a ritual site? Very few of these things have ever been dug, so anything we find could help solve the puzzle. And we've got just 3 days to do it. You really wouldn't know a major monument was here in this field if it wasn't for the crop marks in the aerial photograph. At ground level, there's nothing to indicate its existence. So we're relying on geophysics to locate the huge rings of ditches hidden under the soil. Neolithic causewayed enclosure is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
Well, it is, but I mean, 3 words. Neolithic refers to the period, so in this case it's around 6,000 years ago.
Causewayed?
Well, that refers to the fact that this is a rather strange site, because it's got 2 ditches going round the outside and another 2 going round the inside. And if you look closely at those ditches, look over here for example, you can see they're dug in segments, like sort of string of sausages. And the gaps between the ditches there are the causeway.
Presumably this is the enclosure, this outside bit.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, the enclosure bit is the fact that it's enclosing a space, but it's a lot more exciting than that, because this is the first time in British history people are actually partitioning up areas of landscape for special purposes.
Why are they doing it?
That is a brilliant question, and that's hopefully what we'll be able to find out.
What do you think, Francis?
Well, I like a bit of ritual, I like a bit of religion. So I think they were religious and ceremonial centres to which people came from miles around.
I know you're going to be polite to such a major figure in British archaeology, but basically you think that's twaddle, don't you?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. No. But there's an alternative view here, and that is that this area is rich in natural resources, and in the Neolithic, people were starting to capture those resources and manage them in a way that they hadn't done before, and I think it was the folks here.
So it's either a cathedral or Ambridge. What about fines, Phil?
Well, this is a $64,000 question, Tony. I mean, if we locate the trench right, and if we strike it rich, we could have loads of fines, and those could include organic remains, bits of worked wood and that sort of thing. If, on the other hand, we don't strike it right with the trench, we could get virtually nothing at all. Whatever we get is going to be very, very important. This is a totally virgin site. It's never been looked at before. It will have great implications both on this site and the other causewayed enclosures in the area.
The plan is to put trench 1 on the inner ring of the ditches on the east side, and a second trench on the west side where the ring of ditches disappears under an area of thick mud left by an ancient river channel. The dark band running down the middle is mud left by a Roman canal. The geophysics team have finished surveying the areas targeted for the 2 trenches, and the results aren't what was expected.
You've got a problem, I'm afraid. This is where the inner ditch should run. We've done the geophysics and I can't see it at all.
But there is something here, isn't there?
I just think that's probably geological.
Well, it shows up superbly well on the photograph.
I know it does. But look at the other end, where you can't see it.
That's just that black alluvial stuff, isn't it?
But look at the geophysics. It's so clear.
Isn't it?
I don't understand why we're not seeing it at this end when it's so clear here.
Does that alter our plan?
Yeah, not drastically. I think we want to go for where we can see it nice and clearly. So we'll send Uncle Phil off to that trench.
And what will you? You'll stop here, will you? Because you're going to need a lot of your experience on this sort of ground to sort that out.
Yeah, it's going to be tricky. No, I'll stay over here. And maybe with a bit of help from Henry, if he can pin the air photo
He should
down
be able to mark that.
The other side of the field?
Yeah, it's happy with me.
See you later. As the ring of ditches on the east side didn't show up in the geophysics, it's down to our surveyor Henry to calculate where to put trench 1. He does this by matching the ditch outlines seen on the aerial photograph to GPS readings.
Basically, you're stood on it now. As far as you understand, I've set out these two pairs of canes.
Yeah.
Should mark either side of the causeway, which gives the ditch that side and a ditch that side.
On the west side, the ditches show up clearly on the geophysics, so John can tell Phil exactly where they're located.
So you should get the ditch coming through here, terminating here, a break, and then another big pit or ditch section.
Bit this way.
Finding the rings of ditches is going to be key to figuring out why Neolithic people built these monuments. What we do know is that after 2 million years wandering the landscape, our hunter-gatherer ancestors began a more settled existence. This change from a completely nomadic lifestyle marked the beginning of the Neolithic Age, which in Britain lasted from 4000 until 2500 BC, when metals first came into use. Causewayed enclosures were built from the very start of the Neolithic period and must have played an important role in the new way of life.
Right. I think we're down at the right level here, Kerry. You can see it's good and clear.
Yeah,
So you see the change from the orange here to the clay.
it's very clear from up here.
Is it?
Yeah,
I think that's your buried Neolithic soil.
right.
Francis's trench on the east side and Phil's on the west side are both placed where we think the inner ring of the ditches is. If we look at these trenches in the context of the entire field, we can get our first real sense of how big the monument is. But it's not the only one discovered in this area. So this is our causewayed enclosure here, and there's another one here, and one here, and one here, and yet another one here. Yet these are very rare Neolithic phenomenon, and we've got 5 together. Why is that?
Well, I think it was deliberate. I think these are marking the edge, the boundary, of a really important cultural territory.
Cultural, Stuart?
Well, it could be cultural, it could be practical as well, because if you look at this grouping, and they are very close together, they seem to relate to the Valley of the Welland. And if you look at this geological map, over here, all these pretty colours are upland. All this blank yellow out here is fenland, it's bog, it's unpleasant. But all these enclosures occur where the Welland meets the bog, effectively. They're on this zone in between. So I think we've got to look at reasons why they all cluster together.
So are you going to try and tie them all up for us?
Well, I'd like to. I mean, it's a big task. I'm going to go and look at these locations for the causewayed enclosures we know about and see how they relate to the geography, how they relate to each other, see if we can somehow get back to the landscape of the Neolithic.
Knowing when you found a ditch can be a bit tricky, as they are, after all, simply holes dug in the ground 6,000 years ago.
It's quite ephemeral though, the archaeology, isn't it, Phil?
What do you mean, pretty vague?
Yeah, basically.
I mean, yeah, it is. It's very, very difficult to see. I suppose identifying it is just a result of observation and experience, really, isn't it?
Subtle changes in the colour of the soil might be the only thing to indicate that you've come across one. And after a little more digging, that's exactly what Phil thinks he's got in Trench 2, along with some of the River Welland.
What have you got here, Phil?
We got the ditch.
Haven't you?
Don't look in that section
No.
because it's actually sloping up. But on this side, damn it, you can see it. It's actually coming down there, and then it dips down here. It's very difficult to see it there. But once you get along here, you can actually see the edge very clearly against this white gravel, and then it rises up the other side. And it's actually filled up with this sticky, sandy clay material. And then up in here, you've obviously got a lot of burning, a lot of charcoal, and a lot of the clay is very, very reddened. So I think they must have had an incredible fire burning there.
It's great, Phil, because we're no longer working blind anymore.
What do you mean we're not working blind? It's so difficult to see the edges. I reckon we are working blind.
But we know where we stand. We know we got a ditch. It's the right shape, it's got the right filling, it's got evidence in it for having been backfilled. No, we're on the money there, Phil, I think.
To make a ditch at Northborough, Neolithic people dug down through dark clay soil into the lighter gravelly soil underneath. We know from excavations at other causewayed enclosures that they placed important objects into the ditches. Then soil from the banks was put back over them. This is what we call the backfill. When the ditch was no longer needed, the remainder of the bank would be placed back on top of it. Ditches might not sound very exciting to us, but they obviously were for Neolithic people, since they put so much time and energy into making them. And if we're to solve the great enigma of what they did here, it's in the ditches we'll find our best clues. In Francis's trench, we relied on Henry's calculations to locate the ditches, and it looks like he's spot on. Miles has taken over the digging, and he's got straight onto one. Hey, Miles! Is that the end of the ditch there?
Yeah, just coming in, you can see we've got all the whiter gravel there, which is the natural, and then you've got all the darker soil coming back here, which is the fill of the ditch.
And rumour has it that in this whole gigantic trench, you've had one find.
One single find from the upper levels of the ditch, which is this very small piece of pottery.
Is there any way that we could date this tiny piece of pottery?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very classic piece of beaker pottery.
Beaker as in the Beaker people?
As in beaker, early Bronze Age, so it's around about 2500 BC.
And would this actually have been a beaker?
Yeah, it's a very sort of finely made, very finely decorated drinking vessel. You sometimes get them associated with burials, but they are quite a common feature, finding them as individual fragments in the top of Neolithic ditches.
Only another 1,000 years to go and we're in the Neolithic?
1,000 years straight down.
The beaker style of pottery was brought here by migrants from mainland Europe. Although we can't be sure why they turn up on the top of Neolithic ditches, it could be because the monument was regarded as a special place even in the Bronze Age. What is it about the Neolithic that gets you going?
I think it's a period when everything happened.
What do you mean?
Well, it's when we stopped being ancient and actually start being modern. In the Neolithic, human beings start taking control of their own world. You know, they control their supply of food, you know, their animals, the milk, meat, cereals, flour.
So where did the causewayed enclosures fit into that?
Well, I think the causewayed enclosures are about settling down in the landscape.
I suppose to build monuments like this in the landscape and transform the landscape does imply some kind of feeling of power.
Yes, but it's a very particular power. These sites are often about death, and death and the ancestors. The world of the ancestors obviously doesn't exist, but in their minds it did, and the ancestors were in league with something bigger and something more powerful. So by linking yourself to heroic figures in the past, you were linking yourself into God.
A great deal's claimed for Neolithic causewayed enclosures. According to Francis, they're monuments built in reverence to gods and ancestors. According to Ben, they're more likely to be the first farms or villages. But which is it? Or is it neither? We've found the inner ring of ditches in both our trenches, but what we haven't found is anything to help us answer these fundamental questions. Neolithic ditches are the treasure chests of their age. Tomorrow we'll carry on digging them, and perhaps we'll strike it lucky. Beginning of day 2 in our quest to find out what Neolithic people were doing here 6,000 years ago. Yesterday we were looking for the all-important ring ditches and we found a slice of one just here. So now we're looking for evidence of people on the ground. How are we doing on that score, Francis?
Well, that's fantastic, Tony. We've actually got the original surface on which people would have walked around in the Neolithic.
This is this dark stuff here?
This is the dark stuff here. But you've got, look, you've got burnt bone here. You've got a large piece of bone here. You've got pieces of pottery there. It's intact. It's absolutely extraordinary. You know, people were walking here 6,000 years ago.
Is this in the ditch?
No. This is on a causeway. Now look, let me explain how it works. The ditch comes through to that drawing board there.
So the ditch is going this way?
It's going like that.
Yeah,
the ditch is going like that. It comes to a drawing board where it stops, okay? Then you have an undug bit, which is the causeway.
The causeway going in this direction?
It's going in that direction.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the ditch picks up again over there.
So now we have the basic structure of the monument. A ditch, then a causeway, and then another ditch. The word causeway is perhaps a little confusing, since it suggests a structure, but in fact all they are is the gaps between the ditches.
The other segment of ditch is over here.
And have we found anything here?
Yes, same thing again. Everything's preserved. there's been a lot of bonfires or something on the surface. You can see all this charcoal here, yeah, and sort of red fire-cracked silt.
How can you say for sure, though, that that's Neolithic and not Bronze Age or even later?
That could be Bronze Age. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they didn't use it in the Bronze Age. But we do know there are Neolithic people here because clever old Matt has found, let's have a look, about 10 minutes ago, that. You know what that is?
Is that an arrowhead?
Yeah, it is. It's a very distinctive leaf-shaped arrowhead. It's snapped across the middle, that's why it's got a flat end. And they're most commonly found in causewayed enclosures.
It's a beautiful find, isn't
It's
it?
absolutely cracking. It's so thin and beautifully made, that lovely ripple flaking on it. It's a lovely thing.
So at the very start of day 2, we've got our first Neolithic find. Leaf-shaped arrowheads were made from the very early Neolithic period at around 4000 BC. This one was either broken while being made or during hunting. It was found outside a ditch in Trench 2 and was most likely just thrown away. The all-important placed objects will be inside the ditches. And now that we've found them, Francis helps Matt mark out an area to dig.
We're digging the inside, that's right, yeah, so anything from the interior will be in this side of the ditch. I think it's going to be the best bit to dig.
If these monuments were part of a transition to a more settled lifestyle, we'd expect to find evidence of a Neolithic village here. The most natural place to position one would be in the centre of the monument. So the geophysics team has been busy surveying this area. Is that it?
What do you mean, is that it? Look, we've got some fantastic results. This may be the first evidence for activity inside the enclosure.
Where's the evidence?
Well, I mean, these blobs, they suggest to me burnt features, maybe pits.
Does that look like human activity to you?
This could well be the traces of settlement inside the enclosure.
Francis?
Yes, I hope Ben's right, because if it is, it's going to be incredibly well preserved, because we know there's much more alluvium there than we expected. But it could be later than the Neolithic, it could be Bronze Age, it could even be Roman.
There's only one way to find out, isn't there?
Yeah, let's get
Dig a
stuck
hole.
into it.
The landscape around Northborough is no longer lush fenland. It's nearly all been drained for farming. But not far away at Woodwalton, there's a remaining patch of wetland fen. Phil's come here with Maisie Taylor. Maisie is an ancient wood specialist who worked on other causewayed enclosures, including one near here at Eton. Incredibly, she found the remains of a Neolithic wooden bowl there. Maisie wants Phil to help her figure out how they were made.
They were making wooden bowls from a particular part of an alder coppice. Now, luckily for us, this alder coppice has got precisely what we want. There's some wood on this, which is exactly what will make a bowl. And you can see it, I think, quite easily, because this is all sort of bubbled up here, where it's been repeatedly cut. And can you see it actually is quite bowl-shaped already?
So that's the outside of the bowl.
Yeah.
And we'll have to hollow out.
Yeah.
The inside.
Yeah.
It didn't grow naturally like this, did it?
Oh, it is natural, but with a bit of help from man. This would be cut down regularly, every, say, 10 years or so, to start the regrowth, and you'd have a crop of rods come up round the outside.
The modern forestry, they plant a lot of trees, they harvest them, bang, everything's gone. But in the past, they used the woods as a resource. They kept cutting down a tree here, coppicing a tree there, and it maintained itself in a fantastic balance. You had a never-ending source of material.
So what we're doing is going back to the original techniques, literally, that started in the Neolithic. But you're going to have the advantage of a chainsaw, aren't you?
Well...
Look at that. I mean, that is a bowl, isn't it? Look.
You like it as it is.
I hate it.
While Maisie and Phil gather up their wood, John is marking out the trench in the central area of the monument. At least he will do when he's figured out where he is.
You're completely lost in this flat field. I think you're a little disorientated, perhaps. Are you you sure? That's the ones that we were standing by just before?
No, we were stood here and we moved that way.
Can I trust you that it is supposed to be here?
Of course you can.
Thanks for your help.
Now that's sorted out, Bridget can get on with looking for evidence of a Neolithic village. If they lived here, there'd be a lot of human and animal waste, and this waste would raise the level of phosphate in the soil. Paul Middleton and his team are drilling down into the ground to reach the Neolithic layer of the soil. The samples are then taken to a lab in the incident room for analysis.
Paul, you're our poometer, effectively, aren't you?
Well, perhaps that's one way of looking at it. Certainly we're measuring how much there is in the soil in relation to human and animal activity, which can certainly include excreta.
You were collecting your soil samples, boiling them up with hydrochloric acid to produce that solution, and then adding a reagent to turn the solution blue if there was phosphate present. Presumably, looking at these samples, this one's a quick wee and a one-off picnic visit, as it were, and the dark blue one is from the village cesspit.
And that one's a real hotspot in the context of the site.
The plan is to take samples of Neolithic soil on a grid which covers the whole site. Any hotspots will tell us there was a large number of animals or humans here. In Phil's trench, Matt has been digging down through the layers of a ditch. There's not a lot of finds so far, but one of them takes us back to the very beginnings of pottery.
Well, it's not exactly the crown jewels, is it?
Well, no, I think it is for the Neolithic. It's quite nice. We've got fragments of pottery come out here. We've got this little sort of rim with these decoration on it.
And is that definitely Neolithic?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. That looks like it's a piece of Mildenhall ware. This is the first sort of pottery vessel that we see in the British Isles. It's quite coarse, and to our eyes, it's very basic. But this is state-of-the-art domestic product for the Neolithic.
And all these bits?
We've got nice bits of firecracked flint, all that sort of crazy lines on it suggests it's been in the middle of a hearth, in the middle of a very intense fire.
Where did all this come from?
Well, we think we've got the end of the ditch here, so we concentrated on that, and it's all coming from the top layer of it there, where all the charcoal and burnt daub was. If we get down in deeper, hopefully we might find some more meaty stuff.
This is the terminus of the ditch, isn't it? Every time any of the archaeologists say ditch terminus, they go all dewy-eyed. What's so significant about it?
Well, if we get the terminal, sort of the butt end of the ditch, it tends to be where there's a focus of deposits. So if we're looking for sort of evidence of pottery, bone, other kind of possibly even ritual deposition, it's going to be in that end piece of the ditch.
Though, to be honest, Miles, I don't think this quite constitutes ritual deposits. They almost look domestic and stuff.
Early days.
Early days, yeah.
Still got a day and a half left.
Mildenhall ware was made from about 3600 BC. They were round-bottomed pots, decorated with simple lines and dots on the rim and sides. This find gives us the first firm evidence the causewayed enclosure at Northborough was in use from the very beginnings of the Neolithic age.
You couldn't wait then?
Oh, nothing was going to stop me about this one. In fact, I was so excited about doing this that I actually made some tools before we came here. I don't know what sort of tools you're after, but this is the one that I'm really excited about. I mean, look, what I've done there is made a little chisel, and I've ground the edge off and put that in a handle as well.
That's fantastic.
So I've never made one of those before, so I don't know how it's going to work.
Well, this is one of the great opportunities because we've got the drawings of the ones we found here. And you can see in this one the swirly grain of the coppice stool, but on the rim, which is round here, so that would be on there, you've got these funny little marks. They show that these were made by charring and then scraping.
Ah, so are you using fire to actually soften the wood? Because you see, I mean, I've been looking at that wood and I'm thinking, well, if we got to gouge all that out with something like that, that's a lot of work and a lot of time.
The thing is, in the Neolithic, if you're sitting around in the evening, instead of watching telly, you're watching your bowl charring.
Well, I think before we can watch the equivalent of Neolithic TV, you better go and get your fire started and I'll carry on making tools.
Right.
It's mid-afternoon and finds are still very sparse. So Francis is relieved when Ian finds something which might support his side of the argument.
I think we've got what looks like the remains of a pot with some sort of burnt material in it.
Ooh. Yeah, it's like sort of wet digested biscuit.
Yeah, it's gone back to mud.
It can't go back to being mud unless it's very, very poorly fired.
Right.
Very poorly fired. But is it actually on the bottom of the ditch?
That's the bottom there. It was really hard.
Yeah.
So it's nearly there.
Oh, yes, it's pretty well on the bottom, yeah. That's interesting. You've got a pot on the bottom of the ditch, near the centre. It's got charred grain in it. It doesn't look much now, but I reckon we're looking there at a deliberately placed offering.
Oh, right.
And that's very good news. Makes me very happy.
Good.
The offering pot turned mushy because it was only partly fired, perhaps in a bonfire. This fits the theory of the pot being used as part of a ritual. The pot maker saw no point in fully firing it, as they'd no intention of using it as a functional pot. Stuart is out and about on his tour of the other Neolithic causewayed enclosures in the area.
I'm now to site at Upton, which is about 11 kilometres southwest of the site we're excavating. And here, a causewayed enclosure was recorded in the ploughed field. And the slope that the enclosure is built upon is actually on a slope which tilts down towards the south, out to that valley area down there, which is the valley of the River Nene. This enclosure clearly is designed to be seen from the valley of the River Nene down here and to look over in that direction. I'm at the causewayed enclosure at Eton that was excavated before this gravel quarrying totally destroyed it. And what he found here was a causewayed enclosure actually set in the bend of a river which was out beyond it. You've got to remember, in the Neolithic period, this was floodplain, gravels, water flowing, lots of different stream and river channels, very difficult territory to actually negotiate.
Ian is definitely having a good day in Trench 1. He's now uncovered some large bones in the same ditch he found the offering pot. Our bones expert, Peter Rowley-Conway, is delighted to have something to look at.
So Ian, where are these from? They're all from the top layer, this black showing in the section.
Right, well these are very interesting. These are cattle bones.
Oh, right.
This is from the rear leg, the rear foot of a large animal, large cow. This could well be Neolithic in size because they get smaller after the Bronze Age. So this is a big animal. And what's this? This is a forearm bone. It goes right there.
Oh, right.
And this, looking at it, has been split while the animal has just been newly killed. It's hit it with a rock or something right at that point and split this side wall of the bone off.
Right.
To expose all the marrow inside, and they used to eat a lot of marrow in those days, so you find a lot of bones like this.
Is it being cooked?
I would think not before it's had the side knocked off to get the marrow out, because that would cause the marrow to dissolve. So I think this has been done just after the animal's been skinned and butchered.
Francis's trench is providing our first clues about what Neolithic people did here. The offering pot at the bottom of a ditch is evidence for Francis's ritual activity. But the cattle bones suggest there was domesticated cattle kept here, which supports Ben's view that this was a farm. As yet, there's not enough evidence to prove either theory. And what about the Neolithic village Bridget was looking for in the central area of the monument? How have we done, Bridget?
Well, we've definitely got a prehistoric topsoil that covers the entire site.
And this is here?
This is all of this brown material here.
Yeah.
Within it, we do have small areas that have charcoal rich, a little bit of burning going on, but nothing definite. And our one glimmer of hope is over here, where Marcus is. He's cleaned off onto natural. And within the buried soil here, he's got this bit of burning going on, and the geophysics spikes suggest there should be something around here.
Wow.
Not that great.
Does that wow mean what I think that wow means?
Yeah, I'm afraid it does, Tony.
But aren't we in a bit of a crisis? Apart from that spike, there's nothing in the middle of this geophys that you'd want to shake a stick at.
No, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. You see, you're being a Western modern man. You see a circle, you see a target, you go for the bullseye. They weren't like that in Neolithic times. They were obsessed with boundaries. So this site is actually surrounded by not just one, but two great ditches around the outside. So it's double bounded. So I think the key to understanding this site lies in those double ditches around the outside.
So what do we do tomorrow?
Well, we dig them.
So all day today we've been moving closer and closer to the centre. Now we're going to turn this whole dig upside down, go back to the outside, put all our resources there and hopefully get more evidence about the people who built this place. On the site of our Neolithic causewayed enclosure, we're working furiously away trying to find out what the Neolithic people were actually doing there. But Francis has brought me here to Woodwalton Fen to show me what the fens were like 6,000 years ago. Pretty bleak place for people to live.
Well, actually not, Tony. OK, come here in the winter and you get a bit damp. But you actually lived on the edge of the fen. I mean, they weren't stupid. They didn't like to live in water. You put your house on the dry land, OK? And then you had fields around you on the dry land, which are growing wheat and barley. But in the winter, when protein's getting a bit scarce, if you're living on the edge of the fen, it's great. Because you can come out here, you've got this stuff, you can feed as hay, it's just reed, but, you know, sheep love it. You can put this stuff on your roof as well to keep you nice and dry. It's much better thatched than wheat or barley straw. And then we're standing on nice squidgy peat, OK? But you dry this stuff up, and it makes fantastic fuel. So this is a wonderful natural resource.
Was there anything to hunt?
Oh, huge amounts. That bit of water behind us would have been covered in ducks. There'd have been hundreds of duck on there. You also had geese, and then also, lurking in the depths in there, you'd have had sturgeon. So they probably ate caviar in the Neolithic. I think living here in the Neolithic would have been terrific.
On days 1 and 2, we put trenches over the inner ring of ditches and one in the centre to look for a village. Today we're going to shift our attention to the outer ring of ditches and put a fourth trench here, where the ditches can be seen clearly in the aerial photograph. Henry's calculated where these outer ditches should be and tells Phil where to put the trench. We know that the inner rings of ditches were built at the very beginning of the Neolithic period. Now we want to see if the outer rings were in use at the same time or added later. Paul's finished measuring the amount of phosphate in the Neolithic soil, and the results are very interesting. On the graph, we can see 3 spikes of high concentrations of phosphate. Their location is along a line which runs from outside the monument into its central area.
Paul, what you reckon is it actually might be animals being driven in to this central area?
That's right. I mean, I think the levels are high enough. They're way above anything we expect for general background, even sort of fairly intensive human activity. And the location of them suggests it may well be some kind of, perhaps a droveway or something, where the animals are coming in and out.
A droveway and animals.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Ben, you seem particularly excited about the idea of there being sheep and cattle on this side.
Yeah, definitely, because this is evidence for these herds that we were talking about, people actually sort of capturing these wild animals, domesticating them and actually pulling them into the enclosure.
So this is definitely one up for the farming side of the argument, much to Ben's delight. In Phil's trench, they've successfully located the ditches of the outer ring, but so far there's no interesting finds from them, which is frustrating Bridget a little.
We've sectioned like 5 small ditches so far and found, what, 3 fragments of bone in the whole lot? And that is it.
Don't be negative, Bridge, don't be negative.
I'm not being negative, I just think it's a little strange.
You want loads and loads of finds.
I don't want loads of finds.
Well, you're complaining about the absence of them.
Well, of course, it is always nice to have something to keep you going.
In here.
Bridget's frustration with the lack of finds is understandable. But what we have to remember is that this monument is 6,000 years old, which means it was built 2,000 years before Stonehenge. So anything that's found here offers precious insights into a time when our ancestors first made their mark on the British landscape. Phil takes a break from digging to see how Maisie and James are getting on.
Yeah, so you've got quite a nice surface there for you to go to work on.
Phil's flint tools are as precious to him as a jar of ale, and now's his chance to try them out.
It is an excellent tool. See?
His scraper does a good job on the charred wood, but he's also made a Stone Age chisel, which he's been dying to put to the test.
So this really is groundbreaking stuff, because I've never used one of these before. And this works like a dream, this, doesn't it? You can actually get in amongst it. I mean, I think if you were really using a wood with a nice grain on it, it would split out so easily.
It would, it would.
I mean,
you're getting such a nice finish bit there, though.
Maisie likes it.
It's fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Convert, chisels, chisels. God, I wish I could spend longer, but I can't. I've got to get back.
Okay.
But just carry on the experiment.
Yeah, okay. There you are, James. A hard act to follow.
In Phil's trench, the line of the outer ring of ditches is now strikingly clear in the soil.
What are these for, Francis?
I think this is a miniature version of the larger ditch, the ring ditch that we've got in the middle of this enclosure. Now, and the reason I think that is that over here, we've got a causeway. So we've got one bit of ditch ending here, another bit of ditch ending there.
You say a causeway, but presumably not for people to come across, they just fall in.
Well, exactly. No, it's obviously ridiculous as a practical thing, yeah? But what I think these causeways are doing, and there are lots of them, I mean, there's more over there, is they're dividing this ditch deliberately into short lengths.
Why would you do that?
I think it's something to do with families. Look, Victor's drawn a picture. Let me show you. Now, this is the sort of thing that was happening. You see this chap here? Maybe he was the head of the family, yeah? And he's placing a pot, just like that pot, do you remember we found yesterday?
Yeah.
But a sort of half-fired thing. Now, it's a hopeless pot. Absolute disaster, but it was full of charred grain. It was obviously an offering. It's not a practical pot, just as that ditch isn't a practical ditch. It's representing something. And I think that charred pot, just like that skull behind, is representing a story in a family history.
So a bit like a cemetery where you not only bury people, but somehow you use them as an act of remembrance.
Yes, exactly like that. Absolutely.
Francis is convinced Neolithic people used the ditches to commemorate their ancestors. But do our finds support this view?
We've had more bones than any other finds, but do they tell us anything else other than that the Neolithic people ate meat?
They tell us a very great deal. What we've got here is about 24 cow bones. They had pigs, they had sheep. These guys know exactly what they're doing. They're not in a kind of long transitional period. They are full farmers. They're eating hazelnuts to be sure, but most of their food is coming from domestic crops and domestic animals.
Why do you say that? Sure, it's just an assertion.
It's an assertion which I can back up. Here's a cow bone that has been through it, you might say. This is a hip bone. What's happened here, they've been cutting the little ligaments that join them so you can break this into separate blocks of meat. But this is not, and I stress not, a ritualised bone. This has not been buried with reverence in some important votive deposit. It's been thrown away.
How do you know that?
Because a dog has come along and chewed this away and this end here, and after the dog has left it, a mouse has come along and had a go there, just to wear its teeth down a little bit. And only after that has this bone become buried. This is classic domestic refuse.
It's a rough old bone, isn't it?
It's lucky to be here.
Yeah.
These are perhaps the most interesting cow bones we've got. This came out in 3 bits, and they go together like this. This is a male. Normally, these bones are broken, and you'd say, right, that's a bull. But because we've got the whole bone, you can measure the length as well. And that is very, very interesting, because it's too long to be a bull. So what is it? What causes bone to grow in length like that is castration. This bone comes from a bullock. They were maintaining bullocks, at least some, to increase the meat yield and get more beef off the hoof.
So these aren't casual farmers who've just strode in after being
These
nomads.
people know exactly what they're doing, and they are getting 80–90% of their food from cattle, and I think Northborough joins a number of other sites to tell us that we've got sophisticated farmers on our hands. These are not half and half people.
A hearty Neolithic steak was no doubt complemented with fruits of the forest, some live yoghurt, and served up in handsome alderwood bowls.
Ready for tea?
That is just so amazing. I mean, they are works of art. And I mean, the texture of that wood down there is magnificent.
Yeah, that effect is exactly the same as we saw in those original drawings of the Neolithic ones.
You must feel very, very chuffed with it.
Yeah, I'm really pleased. It's brilliant.
If you had to really list the sort of things that you've learnt from it, what would they be?
Well, we understand much better now why they used these coppiced lumps, and I think if we had to go back to the wood and get more, we'd choose slightly differently. We know more about them now.
And you've even prepared a feast. Is this all genuine Neolithic?
We've got evidence for all this, the nuts, the berries, the sort of yogurty, cheesy things, lovely Neolithic herbs.
What's this?
Honey.
Ooh. I'll dip that in there.
Yeah, very good.
I could get attached to those.
Absolutely.
No bevy, I suppose.
Well, we do actually have some cider, some fermented apple juice.
So why isn't it out?
James hasn't made the wooden beaker yet.
I could drink it out of the bottle. Would you like a blackberry?
Stuart has now combined his knowledge of the Neolithic enclosures he visited with what we know about the one at Northborough.
This is the best understanding we have of the monument in its landscape at the time.
So it really is quite a lonely situation, surrounded by water channels with only a few dry land approaches to it at most times of the year.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, one of the objectives we set out from here was to try and look at this monument against the background of all these other causeway enclosures. There are 5 in this grouping, which seem quite unusual. If you look at these other enclosures, can you see up at Barham, its visibility is restricted in that direction. Can't see anything in that direction at all, but you can actually see in a cone down to the river. At Uffington, it's exactly the same. See how it collects the river, as it were, in that direction, but there's no visibility that way.
So really, they're all looking down onto sort of waterways, and Etna and Northborough are also in very watery situations, as we've just seen from Henry's reconstruction.
Exactly.
But do you think they're all contemporary still?
My guess is that they are. I mean, one thing that makes me think that is the commonality of shape. They've all got this very strong oval shape. And what makes it particularly interesting at Northborough has actually got more rings than the others. And that's the furthest east along the Welland. And it just makes me wonder if that's kind of as far as they were reaching out, and this one had specific monumentality that they wanted to implant on the landscape.
Phil's perseverance has been rewarded with an important last-minute find.
Well, what do you got?
Wow, what have I got?
Gordon Bennett. Where did this come from?
Oh, that's down in the bottom of the ditch there.
This is the best bone we've had yet. Do you know what this is?
Well, no, I wouldn't ask you if I did.
No, you wouldn't. This is an Aurochs.
What?
Wild cattle. It's the only one we've seen so far. This is incredible. This is a distal fit. It goes right there in me, and it's about 4 times as big. This has never been domesticated. This is a wild animal through and through.
How frequently do they turn up on causewayed enclosures?
Not very often, let's put it that way. It's a nice thing to find. It's very special.
Well, you see, you know, you're kind of saying how important it is. The place where we found it is special.
Why is that?
Because it's right at the bottom of the ditch. It's right in the middle between the 2 ends. That's
This
right.
did not happen by accident. This has been put here quite deliberately.
It does seem just too much
It's
of a...
too much of a coincidence.
That is
too much of a coincidence.
I'd better go and find some more.
Made my day.
Aurochs were hunted in the Neolithic period, but must have been quite a challenge to kill. They were formidable beasts, built like a Spanish fighting bull, but twice the size. At the start of our dig of the causewayed enclosure at Northborough, we had 2 opposing views about what Neolithic people did here. Francis argued it was a place for rituals revering the ancestors and gods, while Ben thought it was where Britain's first farmers gathered in their resources.
So after all this archaeology, are you still convinced that essentially this is a big farm?
Well, look, we've got enhanced magnetism in the ditches here. This is burning. This is debris and charcoal from settlement being dumped into the top of ditches. On the interior of the enclosure, again, the anomaly is raised by the burning here, so it comes out as yellow. The phosphates, too, show that we've got animals being driven into the enclosure, pulled outside and then driven in. So, you know, I think it's pretty compelling.
Compelling?
Superficially, yes, but the burning on the interior would fit beautifully with people using this seasonally, clearing off the vegetation and then getting on with their religious activities.
It does stretch credibility somewhat, doesn't it, to think that this huge earth monument with these massive ditches around it was built simply to be a farm.
Well, not a farm, but a place where resources are pulled into. They dominated a wide area of this landscape. They are farming it, and they're bringing the resources back here. I just don't think you let your cows into church, do you? And you don't let them poo in church when they're there.
That's the point, isn't it? Aren't you simply importing a theory which works well in other sites where they have found ritual deposits and sticking it here where they haven't found any?
Well, I'd contest the fact they haven't found any. We've got that half-fired pot, which doesn't make any sense, full of charred grain right in the bottom of the ditch, and that Aurochs bone, which is placed absolutely on the bottom of the ditch, right in the middle. And that thing is a deliberate placement.
So are you prepared to concede that there might be a ritual element here?
Well, look, I think in everyday life there's an element of ritual that creeps in, and I think we can pick that up through archaeology. So I'm prepared to concede that they were doing things that were not wholly practical all of the time.
And are you prepared to concede that there was probably some farming going on here?
Of course. And I think what really worries me, Tony,
Yeah.
I think if we continue this discussion for another 2 or 3 minutes, we might end up agreeing. So I think we should stop.
No, let's stop now. Cut. The causewayed enclosure at Northborough was the grandest of the group in the area. It was situated on an island surrounded by lush fenland and river channels, and seems to have been built in 2 phases. The inner ring of ditches was built first at the very start of the Neolithic age, while the smaller ditches of the outer rings were added later. The light gravelly soils of the banks would have stood out against the landscape and could have been seen from a great distance. The effect of the whole monument would have been very dramatic. No other great monuments came before it. No other man-made structures competed with it. Over the past 3 days, we've managed to tease out a picture of this part of East Anglia 6,000 years ago. If I'd approached the site then, I'd have seen massive ditches ahead of me, and I'd have crossed them along a series of causeways until I came to this huge central area. And ahead of me, I'd probably have seen a group of our Neolithic ancestors hacking away at a carcass. I'd have seen others commemorating the dead by placing bones and pottery into a shallow grave, while they waited for other local settlers with whom they could exchange grain or livestock. The fens are still farmland today, and the field boundaries stretch off into the horizon, but it was right here our ancestors put down roots and created the first farming communities.